David, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being on, man. Really
Great
appreciate
to
it.
be here. Looking
Likewise,
forward.
I don't know if I mentioned yesterday, but how old are you again? 30.
I'm 37.
God damn. I think the topic of this episode, we should switch it up from, fashion business and actual productive things to,
My
just
my
your
daily
beauty routine.
skincare
Yeah.
routine.
Just your beauty routine in general. Yeah. Because I know it hasn't been like having a relaxed lifestyle. I know that's not it for you.
No, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
I do look younger uh than I actually am, and I get that all the time when meeting people in the industry and people like, you look so young and you're doing this and
I mean, you look
uh,
my age, man. I'm 29. You're
okay.
almost 10 years older than me, and we look exactly the same age.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, maintaining that positive energy, that spirit. Um, and good DNA, I guess.
Right. Yeah. So if you think about things hard enough, you can distort reality, just sort of like fixture. Interesting. Awesome. Well, let's see.
Yeah,
Let's actually get started with the podcast. So just for the guests and listeners at home that don't know anything about you and what you do, can you just give us a very, very brief introduction?
sure. So my name's David Rimokh. I am born and raised in LA. And I'm still out here repping LA. I have been in the fashion apparel space ever since I left college. So almost more than 20 years. Sorry, I said that wrong. About 16 years.
Yep.
Um, and I've been involved in operations, sourcing. Um, I come from a family business that operates in the apparel space, specifically in accessories.
Mm.
So that's where I grinded and learned the trade, and it's been in my blood. So I've been involved ever since I was a kid. My dad and my brothers working in the business, um, and I was with them for some time before I decided that I need to venture out of my own space and um, explore being an entrepreneur the same way my dad built his organization in order to obtain that rough and uncomfortable sense of building yourself, because managing something from the top without the full experience I don't feel is authentic.
Mm.
um, and I'm all about authenticity, being genuine, and being able to lead from experience.
Mm.
So back in 2012, decided to take a leap of my own, with some seed money to develop a brand. I didn't really know what I was doing at the time. I was early 20s. Um, and I I had some sourcing connections in over in Asia. So I made my way there to kind of learn the ins and outs of denim manufacturing. Um, so I was, posted at the factory um, for several months, trying to put together a collection um, of, what I thought was relevant. Um, at the time, like, I was just, I was not really, I didn't really have a direction, per se. I was just trying to put it together. And I ended up doing that under another label. Um, and I came back to the States and tried to put the line in front of some people that were influential, and I got shot down right away. So, people told me, "What are you doing? What is this? This doesn't belong anywhere. This is a mishmash of stuff."
Now,
Um,
what about it back then do you think did not resonate? Just it wasn't good enough, or it was just not really
it
the.
wasn't really authentic to myself and what who I am. It was more of um, you know
This is what's trending. This is the potential
trending
opportunity.
colors, floral print. I actually have the collection that I look at. It's in archives every once in a while, just to remind me of where I started.
How does that feel?
It feels uplifting. It's kind of like a project that you started that you didn't really know what you're doing and tried to put it together, and how far I've developed as an individual since then, professionally and just individually. It just, reminds me of the past, and I always use the past to enhance my future. I think history, and experiences that you've gone through, should never be forgotten. And that's how we improve. That's how we grow as individuals, I think. So back to that story. I immediately scrapped that, and I said, you know what, no more trying to
No more floral prints.
no more floral prints. It was all women's at the time, so it was that's what I was trying to penetrate. No more just listening to trying to put together what everyone else is saying. Let's just do what I feels right. So I scrapped that, focused on who I am and where I grew up, and that's LA. And so why do we need to go outside and try to figure out, how to put something together when I have all the resources home, like in here? And LA is really the hub for denim in US. It's there's a lot of resources, and at the time, labor
And
was
creative,
cheaper.
and there's a lot creatively as well, right? Because I think back when you started, probably LA wasn't seen as, I mean, there were a couple of brands, of course, but internationally, it wasn't recognized as sort of like a respectable creative hub for a specific type of visual, for a specific type of visual philosophy than it is now, right? So you did have anything in that sense. So not only from a resources perspective, but also from an identity perspective.
Absolutely. LA has its own, kind of vibe. And there's a lot that of LA represented in what I put out. And for me, it's like, what is a staple? What is it that you wear every day that represents, who I am? So for me, that was denim, tees, leather jacket, denim, t-shirt, very easy, cool. And it's all about recreating the same vibe in so many ways. And denim is a medium that has unlimited usage. You can create forever. So that's really what we focus. That's what I focused on in building RTA, the Road to Awe.
Right. And how would you compare both what the brand was then to what it is now, but also the person that you were there, or maybe the manager or founder that you were there versus the leader that you are today? What do you think have been the biggest differences?
I mean, when I started, there was no resources. It was just like trying to figure out whichever way to get things done. I had to really focus on every part of building a fashion company. I mean, I still do today, but instead of having, individuals taking care of things with your oversight, it was you figuring out every part of the way, from sampling, ordering fabric, development, relationships with laundries, cutting and sewing, all
marketing,
that,
sales, everything.
Sales. How are you going to get this out? What is the strategy? How, I'm a nobody. How am I going to get this out to the world? And at the time, e-com wasn't really what it is today. It was all through through wholesale channels.
Right.
Um, Marketing, so we didn't have social wasn't a thing till I feel like mid 2015, 16. That's when it started. So it was more old fashioned, through press, through publications, through the fashion weeks, getting into the right stores. So that I had to figure all that out. So sampling, sales, production, how are you going to produce this? Through what channels, where, what's the most efficient way? And then, finance too, finance, cash flow, how to get things paid for, how to learn, how to use a factor, and credit terms and build on that. And then, your systems too, how do you, get out POs and, how do you account for inventory in the right way and raw materials, and it's a whole complex web.
Of course.
But I feel like when I started, it was much more. It was easier to figure things out because you're handling
one problem
everything
at a time. Yeah, and it was one thing straight on. Yeah.
And I always knew, and I mean, there always is a mountain of things to figure out and a mountain of problems, but it's one problem at a time.
Right. Yes. Which one's staring me in the face right now? Let's figure that one first, and then the others will come later and take that one's position.
Yeah, because you have problems, and within a specific problem, there's could be micro problems that you also have to figure out. So,
of course,
I feel like where I am today, back to your question, I am much more knowledgeable in how things work. I know what not to do. I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. It's always a fine push and pull between creative endeavors and actual business, and having something that works. And that's something I fight with constantly on a day-to-day basis.
And when you say fight, do you think the reason for that fight is because you sort of like haven't figured out your identity within those two principles, or because realistically there's nobody in the business who literally take care of one or the other?
I think, well, no, the identity I have, but it's more of the, if I like something creatively, will that make the most business sense to put out?
Of course.
And is it worthwhile investing your time in this creative endeavor? Will it just fulfill me inside, but at what cost?
Right.
Or will the world understand what I believe in, and will they buy into it?
Right.
Will it get out there in the right way? And there's always an insecurity that I always have. It's like, will this work, and or will this be a flop, or will this actually stick and hit? But you only know if you try. And you can only use so much knowledge and feedback, but you have to try. And that's where you learn.
Of course. And over the amount of mistakes and setbacks you've experienced in your career so far, is there anyone or any single one in specific that maybe has still some emotional effect to this day, some lingering trauma?
For sure. There's plenty I could pick up on. One that comes to mind is a decision I made with Barney's at the time before they closed down. I had a bunch of goods to ship. It was a whole new collection that we worked so hard to produce. We knew there was credit issues. And in hindsight, we ended up shipping a whole collection to them because we wanted it to be out and on terms without a prepayment. And they ended up filing for bankruptcy a month or so after. and I lost a lot of money from that gut instinct to say, everything's going to be okay. They're going to pay us. And we had affirmation from their buyers that that would work out, and it didn't end up working out. And, that was a loss. So that's one example. That's a setback, and you learn from those mistakes. And, for me, the urge to have something out there and represented was right away and hit hit on time, because, the fashion cycle is so, it's so have to be on time. Otherwise you hit the markdown season and you don't get enough time for sell through. So for me, it's like, okay, I should have used better judgment in terms of the situation that was happening.
Interesting. And in terms of developing that better judgment, what do you think was the biggest change you had to experience as an individual to start making those decisions? Because I understand mistakes there's a lot of specific mistakes that make you learn about specific scenarios, but the biggest mistakes usually come from a misjudgment of character, which is most closely related with maybe your personal identity with the business or with yourself. So that's sort of like the biggest piece of the puzzle that I'm trying to understand, of who was David 10, 30, 13 years ago to who is David now. Was David more of a romanticizing creative with dreams and visions, but no specific or technical business know how to make them a reality, or no accountability to make right decisions, versus the David who is the David now,
The David before was naive and had a business background from coming from a finance school and from a family in the industry, but like I said, I've made so many, I've gone through so much the past 12 years of running RTA that I feel like I'm at a level now where I won't be repeating a lot of the mistakes I made, and I've found out a lot of things along the way, and I'm still finding a lot of things out. But there's several things I could say about what I feel I've learned. I feel most confident in about myself right now, and especially running a brand that caters to both men's and women's, dual gender. It's not just very specific item that we focus on here. It's more of creating a full lifestyle for both demographics, and there's so many nuances about not just creating, I'm not just doing a footwear or one item like a denim that's just repeating and that's all my business. It's the whole look. It's the whole. There's so many complexities in just all categories that I create, and I'm also running a retail operation, international business as well, and direct to consumer online. Those are all businesses within themselves.
Of course,
that you have to focus on each one of them. But I think the main thing is always keep your foundation strong. Don't flutter to other ideas without having a strong foundation that keeps everything, that it keeps the heartbeat pumping. And that's something that I've learned throughout the years that is always true in running, being an entrepreneur and running your own business.
And what are those foundations for you?
The foundations for me is focus on what works and what your customers are telling you. Don't if you have something that's working, don't veer away from it. You can add on top of it, but don't veer away from it.
And when you're thinking about a customer, you mean the person that is actually buying the product, not the retailer or the buyer that's buying the product. Because I think that's also a major mistake that especially creatives make. If they start compromising their decision making, thinking about the customer and thinking about the retailer instead of thinking of the person that actually buys and wears their clothing.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of has shifted since post-COVID about that, because the way it used to be pre-COVID is we're putting out what we feel is our identity and our look and how we feel it's the best represented. Post-COVID, it's much more riskier, and people are much people and sort of consumers and wholesalers are much less inclined to take a risk on new ideas and new endeavors without having the full marketing power or capital behind that.
Of course. Yeah. It's just like with everything, where times when there's uncertainty, everybody falls back to what works and what's predictable and what's reliable. But it's a similar principle that you need to learn to adapt as a business owner. But what about your motivations? How have those evolved over the years? Before, probably started out just wanting to make as every young person does, especially a guy, hot chicks, making your dad happy, and money. That's essentially what everything comes down to, right? And then those things start evolving over time. So how has that process been like for you, especially when you start realizing about the real trial and tribulations that come with being in this industry, right? And when you figure out that those motivations are fun, but they're not going to be enough. They're not going to be enough to plow through what it actually means to be a fashion entrepreneur.
The motivation for me, when I started out, was to prove to myself and to the world that I belong and that I can do this. I can have a brand and continue, and it's not just a one trick or one shot pony, that it's here and it's done, that we see so often. And I wanted to prove that that I can do this and have a real operation running, and every season getting better and improving myself and the output. And then, after several years, after like more than midway through, I figured I'm like, okay, I look back, I did it. I have a business, I have a brand. It's internationally recognized. And we have, doors all over, and I have a store. I have a presence in the market. People know about it. I have celebs wearing it, and everything I dreamed of when I was starting this, it's come to fruition. So now what? My motivation, I've gone through. I just want to preface that COVID was a roller coaster for the brand, and for myself individually. We skyrocketed in performance during the whole EDD payments, and a lot of brands that are besides us had the same effect. But after that, things dried up. Sourcing issues, there was a ton of problems and couldn't get in product, and
buyers were dropping accounts like crazy either way.
Stores were going out of business, buyers were dropping, orders were on hold. So it was a whole standstill at that point, where I was forced to make very difficult decisions, and that I didn't know if they were the right ones or not, but I had to. You can only postpone problems for so long. That being said, I had to re-identify myself and the brand and the trajectory of the future and where it's going. And with all this uncertainty going on, it was difficult.
Right. And what kept you going forward? Was it just purely being accountable for your employees, for your family, for yourself, for showing face with your family and friends, or was it something beyond that, just waking up and being like, hey, you know what, this is bad, but I like it. At the end of the day, it's
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the grass always seems to seem greener on the other side. Yeah, I mean, I had a whole organization. I had a whole family of our. I mean, the people I work with, I see every day. Their family. I had 3 stores. I had a network of sourcing overseas and domestically. There's a lot depending on it, and for me, it wasn't about. It was more about everyone else, not just myself. I'm the type of leader who um, wants everyone to be happy first, and then I can rise from that. Um, so the motivation for me was to keep going as difficult it is. I have a lot of hope and have a lot of faith in things figuring itself out, and I wasn't done. I wasn't done, and I had to keep pushing, and I am still pushing. I think there's always tremendous opportunity, no matter how grim, um, you know, numbers are or performance or, and there's always solutions. If you really put your head in and you focus, you can figure it out.
Hmm.
I'm not one to give up.
Right. Interesting. And over the last decade or so that you've been going at this, you've probably experienced a lot of really, really good times and really,
Yeah.
really bad times, but
Yep.
not only once, but a couple of times, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing that the specifics of how each scenario and situation looks like is different. But I'm guessing in hindsight, there's also always things that are similar, right? In good times and in bad times. And it could be variables within the business, variables within the overall environment and industry, or personal things, right? Could you talk about what you think is always a present variable in times of great success and then in times of great failure and difficulties?
I think it's about level setting your expectations and having the wisdom to know that um, things can always get worse and things can always be better. Um, and during good times, it's important to stay humble, and know that um, that I think it's important for me to just keep a neutral, balanced mindset of especially with this such an emotional business. Every day there's highs and lows. Just walking into the office, and during the downtimes, really believing the future and the plan that I've set forth for myself. Um, um, it's it's like I said, there's so many emotions that go into it, and I'm always determined. I'm always determined no matter what to push forward.
Right. So it's just having the inequability of understanding that good times will be over, just as bad times will be over. And having, as you said, a good foundation in terms of what you're making decisions based on, or just disregarding how good the season was or how good this industry is doing right now or how poorly or badly it is right now. It's staying at that level-headed field, which long
Yeah.
term helps you make the right decisions.
Yeah, and as long as you have the foundation that's pushing forward and carrying you, that you can always rely on to as an identity, that will help you get through the more difficult times.
Right. So solidifying an identity that you can use as a continuous benchmark over those difficult good and bad times, or well,
Absolutely.
unpredictable good and
Yeah.
bad times. Interesting. And how does that authenticity look like from a creative perspective? Because from a personal perspective is of course having the right decision making disciplines. But what about creatively, and what about from a business perspective? Creatively, is it more about understanding your identity and your products and being very, very disciplined in the type of product that you put out there and how you communicate it. And then from a business perspective, maybe, just having a shit ton of money in the bank, I don't know. How does that look like?
I think creatively during tougher times, it's for me, it's like taking your foundation and adjusting it in a creative way that still resonates to that foundation, as opposed to reaching for something that's different and new, and relying on that to carry you forward. Because like I said, there's so many, let's just take denim, for example, there's so many variables and ways to play with it and for an end usage. Like I can always take blocks that I know are really the best working ones for me and for the brand and reformat those and create newness. That's from a creative standpoint, and not really going outside an abstract way that I know is not going to be going to have commercial success.
Right.
Which I've done many times. But it really, I think the time to be abstract is when things are really good and you have buzz, you have movement, and you can expand on that. And then business wise, it's important to always know what is going on. It's important to know, to ask questions, consistently ask questions, be curious, and never really get too comfortable where you think everything's running itself and you can just be on autopilot, because that's very dangerous too. I'm in a business where there's so many SKUs, so many different models. It's not a few SKUs that you're just constantly running. So you're always reinventing, you're always creating, you're always developing, you're always selling, you're always producing. So all those cycles are moving at the same time. That's the complexity of this, and I'm sure from all your knowledge too, how difficult it is.
Yeah.
And there's also keeping your investors happy, and coming up with new ideas, new strategies that are different, and knowing which knowing who to work with, what opportunities are worthwhile, what opportunities are a waste of time. There's a lot that you do learn from those experiences as well.
And would you say you are predominantly, when going through those cycles, making those decisions now, would you say it's more of an intuitive process or a rational process for you?
Both. I always, when I'm making decisions, I need to feel it in my gut that, is it a right thing, or am I just doing this because I'm being pressured to do it? Do I really feel it's the right thing? So that's the intuition part, and the rational part is actually sitting down, brainstorming, always thinking what is the worst scenario that could happen. And if you're okay with the worst scenario, then it's fine. I always think worst case, and if I'm okay with that, or if I protect myself or put enough parameters to ensure that it doesn't get worse, then I'm okay to move forward.
And interesting. And how would you describe a fashion business as an entity? Is it an organization that sells products, or is it an organization that manages people and the relationship with products? How would you define, now that you have a very good understanding of what it actually means, right? To actually run a brand in all the sense, working with fashion process is just a very small facet of the entire machine. So how would you describe running a brand today?
Yeah, I mean, I think you asked about you mentioned people. I think people are the most important part of running the business. Having a good team, having a team that is generally humble, has a good work ethic, and surrounding yourself by people who know more in their field than you may. Um, I'm not one to tell everyone how to do their job. I'm relying on them to hold the part of the chain to help us all win as a whole. Um, that goes for, our designers, our production people, our logistics people, marketing, e-com. There's there's all these things like, I wasn't in direct to consumer. I haven't been a direct to consumer whiz off the bat. I mean, there's still terms that are being thrown around casually that I have to stop and say, hey, what does that mean? So I think running a business today is surrounding yourselves by the right talent, even if you have to overpay for it, and sacrifice more for it. And there's also knowing like I said, which opportunities to accept and which opportunities to not entertain. And working with people sourcing wise that you can trust, that there's integrity. Their word means a lot when they're giving you pricing or delivery dates or quality issues, that they understand you and you understand them. So it's long-term partnerships that take time, and not everything is smooth right away, but as you work and you develop this harmony back and forth, that's when you have real partners and real people that support you, and like I support them as well.
And what about your learning process through all of this? Is it, I mean, obviously a lot of it's predominantly been execution based. So you just starts with ignorance and you do stuff and you make a mistake and suddenly that ignorance turns into pain and eventually that pain turns into a lesson. But
Right.
what learning process do you apply today? Because I'm sure it's still a big part of that because of the unpredictable nature of the industry in the world. But
Right.
do you try to learn a lot from the people that you hire? Do you do you listen to the market, and do you just observe what's going on and rationalize and think and theorize, or is it still, you know what, I just look at the problem that's in front of me, I try to understand what's going on overall, but in general it's just you just keep moving forward and you bump your head until the end of times, essentially?
Yeah, I think there's systematic problems that take a long time to fix, and then there's smaller individual problems that are quicker to fix and can be executed in a more proficient manner.
Can you give us a couple of examples of both, maybe, so people can have like a good frame of reference?
Yeah,
They could be hypothetical. They don't have to be,
I mean, let's just say, you have your sourcing strategy. Where are you obtaining your let's say a production, or a development production factory overseas, is just relying on them to just send over product and designs and back and forth like that is not wise, in my opinion. It's for me, it's developing relationships where you can really build a system by taking your time to go meeting with them, with developing the sourcing strategy, giving them more of insight as to the front side of your business so they can understand the full backside, not treating just people just part of a chain. It's a collaborative process for me. Everyone needs to know what the end goal is, and how things work in entirety, as opposed to just tunnel vision. Just this is what you're doing. Nothing else pertains to you, and you're just this part of the chain. And I've worked in both methods where and everyone just focuses on what they're doing, and no one has an outside idea of what's going on, or people have a whole idea and they believe in the vision and they believe in where we need to go, and they're pushing even harder. I think that's more of a more of the right way in our industry to work, and this is industry where it requires everyone's full how can I say involvement and full dedication. You want to get the best out of the people that are involved in this journey. So that may mean working 12, 14-hour days sometimes. But you want them to work because they understand and not work just because they're told to.
Yeah.
And that's a key differentiator for me.
Interesting. I want to put on that. I want to put a really quick opinion on the working with people thing, because I think there's a very important topic there. But before we get to that, just to confirm, it's almost as if you were to simplify the both learning process and decision-making process long-term, is you need to have the right culture, the right systems, and the right principles in place to be able to put trust into people. And that trust, if the foundations are there, everything will eventually sort itself out if trust is established.
Yes.
And it's building the foundations for that trust, which is the thing that takes years and years and years.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, a lot of unpredictability. And let's say there's new people coming in, and there's only so much due diligence you can do and references you can have on certain individuals. It's sometimes to actually trust someone, you have to just jump into it.
Of course.
And there's still an unknown factor, but you have to be able to trust someone. You have to actually just start working trusting them.
Of course.
You have to give them the benefit of the doubt.
Of course. And the more experienced you become, again, the only thing that changes is there's always risk, as it is when always you're putting trust into an employee, a partner, a personal relationship, a friend. But the more experienced you are, the higher probability you are about getting those things right. I think that most people are very bad thinking about percentages, and they think that, oh, you become very experienced in fashion, so therefore you make a lot of good decisions. And ironically, is you still make a lot of bad decisions, but you just make less than you used to. And a small increase of that change from mostly making bad decisions to mostly making good decisions over long periods of time makes the difference between having really, really small brands and really, really, really big ones long term.
Right.
But people don't understand that. People have this set of expectations that, okay, everything is this way, everything is that way. Decisions are easy because of this, or decisions are bad because of this, or times are good because of this and times are bad because of this. But it's a very unique mindset that you need to have.
Right. And I think a lot of it's based on kind of your goals. And in fashion, it's really there's a difference between wanting to create beautiful product that is designed as a representation of yourself, and there's actually running a real business that is cash flowing and able to stay alive. And the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. When they do, sometimes it's great. But when I started, it was all about putting out the product that I feel represents myself, and is a representation of who I am. And it wasn't necessarily focused as much on the business aspect, the analytical aspect, the data. It was just, okay, this is how I feel. This is what's going out. Now, this is how I feel again. Now,
this looks dope. Let's create it. Yeah, this is. Exactly. Yeah, I get it.
Exactly.
It. And wow, yeah. And how do you manage that polarity today? Because I think you can summarize probably one of the biggest challenges about this industry in a lot of different ways is that it is the complete opposite nature of what in one way creates the value in this industry, which is the unrestricted creativity and vision. versus the restrictive nature of rationality and process and business decision making. To be honest, I find it so difficult to find that it's very rare to find without two business partners with completely different brains working in synergy. So how you handle it?
Um, that's a good question. How have I handled it? Um, it's important to have uh, um, the right people who are just as involved as you are, um, whether it's from a partnership or consulting or people that you can rely on to give you valid feedback, and run problems through and ideas, and older people who do have the experience. And I've always relied on that. I've had creative directors, I've had partners, also that, have been on that, on the managing level of the business, that you need to feed and bounce back ideas and get feedback from. Just trying to do everything myself and saying I know how to do it best is a very dangerous way to operate. I'm not saying it's wrong, but without that experience that is necessary to do this, it's very, very difficult.
Interesting. And what about going back to our conversations around building teams?
Yeah.
What do you think are the biggest challenges when communicating your vision, not necessarily to the customers or to the market, but to your own culture, to your own employees? Because personally, I've had this struggle a lot where, you want the creative talents and the vision and the hunger and the ignorance that comes with youth. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult to sell those people on what you're actually working on, because everybody can now open TikTok and believe that they're, Virgil Abloh, right?
Yeah.
So how do you personally approach that?
It's really believing in and having confidence in your direction, and being genuine to yourself. And people can really, I think people really pick up when it's not authentic and when it is. And you want to give people a format where they can respond, and have open dialogue. And I always ask people, what do you think? How do you feel? So when people feel like they're being heard, there's more an intuition to believe that it's also part of them. And like I said earlier, it's when you're just dictating and delegating, and it just becomes you're just like a factory. It's not, there's no creative process in it. It may work in some aspects, but it doesn't help in team building. And
soulless, yeah. So having,
really,
of course, so having a soulless organization might be efficient, might be smooth, but it will create soulless product and a soulless culture.
Yeah. It has to be dynamic, and there has to be soul, because when, there are times that are tough and you feel down and you feel like there's no soul, and it's really important to, if you need to take a break and come back and bring that, it's on me to make sure that everyone always feels that consistently, in the vision, and in the soul of the heartbeat of the brand. Even though we may be changing too, there's times where we're reaching, and we're trying to evolve and adapt to new things. You have to always have that foundation that has that soul.
Of course, it's difficult, right? I think that's also a particular facet of this industry that a lot of people don't really understand, and it's a very difficult type of challenge, because you always hear that the businesses themselves are humans, right? They think, they behave a specific way, they act a certain way. But with fashion, it's that, but they also feel. They're entities with almost feelings. And learning how to approach an entity that requires high level of rationality, but at the same time, a high level of emotional support per se, if the business was a person, that people don't understand how difficult that is. I mean, it's why I think a lot of people really struggle with this long term. And to be honest with you, I think that today, especially now in times like this, is where we really need to stop and think, okay, how does that balance play out? Because when things are tough, everybody's sensitive, everybody's depressed, right? Yourself included. You just have to pretend or tell yourself that you're not and keep going, right?
Yep. You gotta self-motivate, hype yourself up.
Yeah. Whether it be delusionally or not, right?
Yep.
Most of the time delusionally.
Yeah.
But yeah, and it's recently I've been having a lot of these conversations, right? And they've been a little bit more challenging, right? Back when I started the podcast, everything was good. Conversations were very positive. They were more about how much money do you spend on Facebook advertising, right?
Mm-hmm.
What influencers are you working with? And conversations just completely shifted in a good way, I believe. I mean, superficially, I think these conversations are more difficult to hear because they filter your desire to really start a brand or not. But long term, this is the type of responsibility. This is the type of expectation. This is how it feels to run a brand in reality, right? Not in social media, not in Vogue, in reality. So people need to learn and identify that this is the reality of the industry in order to know this if it's cut out for them. Because there's just so many people that think that want to start brands and really don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, there's difference between a creative project and a real business. And I mean, I feel like there's a ton of projects that start for several seasons. They try, and then it doesn't work. You need someone that understands how this works and the backing to really build upon that. But I don't think anyone should start in this world, in this apparel industry, unless they have something that is demanded or there is an actual demand. Because then it's just a very expensive and dangerous road. And I've seen a lot of people lose a lot of money and try to go for home runs without hitting those singles and doubles and striking out very fast.
Which ironically, well, I wouldn't say it happens often, but it's you're manipulated into believing that they happen often, right? Because everybody is a success story on Vogue, but most people aren't. Most people, especially in this industry, you know what? The more in this I might not be right with this, but you can tell me your thoughts on that on this. I've realized that most of the people that have succeeded in this industry, or at least most of the people that are very active into public perception of how this industry works, usually have no fucking idea what they're talking about.
Yeah,
they had a home run. They did something specifically that worked for them for a while. They used that to manipulate their own perception. But people that truly understand the challenges on the day-to-day for a consistent long period of time and that consistently stay on it are very far and few between. Like it's surprisingly little.
Yeah, because it's like, what's next? You hit the home run, you hit something big. How do you sustain that?
Right.
How do you keep it going? How do you build the channels to actually grow from there? What are you adding next? What's the plans? And a lot of people don't even think past that. I feel like I think they say, like, if your brand's around for over 8 years, it's like just 1% of brands that start. That's pretty much the threshold. So I mean, for me, it's also like I said, not getting too high, not getting too low. Just keep humble and always have that motivation to work hard, because the work never gets easier. It just gets more. Um, and that's something I've learned, and I feel like I've been disciplined ever since I was younger to always work full time, invest myself in what I'm doing. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to have one foot in, one foot out.
Right. And how do you think and plan, how do you think and plan now for the future based on everything that you've learned and experienced now? And I mean, personally, because the larger the organization, the more it gets involved with your personal life.
This is my personal life.
Yeah, of course. Yeah,
it's there's no lines.
Yeah. So how do you think about the future now? What expectations do you have? What lessons? What goes through your mind now when trying to predict what's going to happen next in order to be as prepared as you possibly can for that scenario, which is unlikely we'll ever be fully prepared, but we do our best.
Right. I mean, for the brand specifically, we're in a world where it's all digitally motivated. That's where it's going. That's where it has been. And really focusing for us and getting the little attention span that people have these days to really making an impact, and getting in front of them to show what we have to offer. There's so much competition. There's so much volume, product choices that people have to make, and it's only getting more and more. And the question I have every day is how do we stay relevant, and how do we sustain a business and still keep that foundation going?
Right.
Because I've lost that foundation several times throughout. So I've learned the hard way, but I've learned to now focus on that and expand on that. Sorry. So like I said, digital is something that I didn't really focus on. I've always focused on building the brand, having the best image it can, being associating with the right partners, the right sourcing, and keeping it to the highest level. And that was the first 10 years of building the brand and making that concentrate so strong. So when it's time to really focus on the business, I have legs to stand on. And it's not just like an e-com brand that just pops up one day and just starts pushing generic stuff that there's no soul, like you said.
Yeah. Or like building a house on quicksand.
Exactly. So the idea is to have, the recognition that all the work that I've done to build the brand can have validity to the end consumers. This is a brand that did not just pop up. Did not just have it's not like a here today, gone tomorrow. I've built stores. I've built distribution channels. I have quality products. I stand behind everything we put out. But we are now stepping into a world where direct to consumer, online, social is the future. And as much as I don't like playing that game, I have to. I'm forced to. And that's where I believe the efforts are going forward for.
Interesting. So having the right foundations in order to then start asking yourself the question of what relevancy looks like. In order for you to be asking yourself that question in the first place, you need to make sure you have the right foundation first, and then continuously ask yourself, what is relevant? How can we keep the brand up to date? And it mostly is by, I'm guessing, looking at the overall environment and trying to get a grasp on the new important channels they're developing.
Right. And I think also
and the relationship with the brand and obviously the market itself.
Right. Also, using getting smarter about your data, your analytics, what's really working, what worked in the past, what didn't work. I used to really not pay attention and just, put out what I felt right. Now it's much more imperative that I do focus on that. I do find ways to build on what worked and what does work, and continue the development of what I put out based on that data. And that's more of the business mindset. That the business mindset is leading the direction, and then the creative input comes after.
The business mindset shows you the place and the route you need to take on the map forward, but creativity is the one thing that's fueling everything. It's fueling the progress.
Yes.
I guess that could be a good analogy.
Yeah.
Interesting. And is there any brand or individual that you truly have a very genuine sense of respect and admiration for? Because you've seen it all, right? You've probably seen people that have been successful one day, people that were one-hit wonders, people that weren't. So when you think about those things, who do you think about and why?
It's a good question. Someone that I do respect.
It's funny how that question, the answer to that question keeps getting harder the more.
Right.
The
There's
more
a lot of people I respect. But your question, do I have to know that person or just admire?
No, it could be. I mean, if you know them, better, right? But no, it could just be an idea, perception of a specific person or brand that you feel a strong sense of respect and admiration for, genuinely.
Right. I mean, first, I don't know. I would say someone, like a Ralph Lauren. He's the type of guy who's started from humble beginnings and started with a collection and developed and built multiple lines and all different categories and price points that is distributed worldwide in a worldwide recognized name.
Yeah.
And he did it correctly.
When a great example.
It was a long-term process. It wasn't a let's build an empire right away.
Right.
And take over
on TikTok. Yeah.
So I would love to be in a position one day where I have many lines that caters to different demographics, and have that empire under my identity, and give people the confidence to want to be represented with what I produce, to feel the way I feel when I wear my product.
I see. And when maybe today you're, I don't know, looking in the mirror or thinking about the things that you've done, both good, bad, what feeling do you get? Do you have a sense of mostly pride? Are you proud of what you've become, of who you've become? Are you content with where you're at? Are you still hungry, trying to figure out who you will become, and more worried not about your own reflection right now, but how the reflection will look like in the future? How is your own perception in this complicated world and industry? How do you relate with that?
I am proud of what I've done, but I don't use that to motivate me to go forward. I'm still hungrier than I ever was. There's a lot that I've on the table that I feel like I have to accomplish as an entrepreneur. I feel like there's more I have to offer and that I have not yet. And I will be able to as we continue to progress.
Nice. And probably the last question, just to sort of like finish and wrap up this episode, is this is a question that I typically ask at the end of every episode, and I think is particularly relevant to ask in this particular situation. But when it comes to giving a young David advice overall on what the process, could be a business advice, could be a piece of emotional and personal advice, what do you think is the one piece of advice you should have learned faster, or the one piece of advice that you think you still need to do better on today, or just overall the biggest piece of advice you think somebody else would have told you earlier in your life that you actually listened to? What would that be?
I think that communication is always something that is a difficult thing. Not everyone is able to communicate in the most effective way where people understand what you're trying to say, as opposed to, like I said previously, like just pushing and dictating around. I think I wish I told myself, learn how to communicate in the most the best
understanding way,
empathetic way, right? Understanding emotions and having compassion, and that's something I'm working on every day, because I do have to. I deal with a ton of people. I have a lot of emotions, and I never want, however, my emotions to negatively impact my communication with other people. Whoever I'm talking to doesn't need to be affected by what's going on with me at the current moment.
Right.
So that's something that is paramount for me.
Yeah, because people don't really understand. Well, maybe they do, but maybe it's a different way to put it. As we mentioned, we're essentially in the people business, and if you want to be in the people business, you need to learn how to communicate, because communication is essential to build relationships with other humans. Right. And in order to communicate and build those relationships, you need to develop empathy. And empathy is not necessarily just feeling bad for the person, right? Because I think this concept has also been a little bit diluted recently. It's just your ability to understand every person has different goals, a different life, a different vision, different set of perceptions of reality. So exactly circumstances. And your job as a leader is to understand that for every single individual, so you can understand how that will translate into the dynamic of an entire organization with multiple humans being a part of it.
Right.
Interesting.
Right.
Yeah, great. No, I don't think anybody's ever said that, which is usually good.
Yeah. I mean, you have to know your faults, and you have to learn from them, and you have to be able to accept them. Accepting your faults makes you a stronger person.
Right.
And also learning how to say no. For me,
sometimes I want to please everyone and accept all these deals because I'm always looking at the bright side of it. But you have to look at both. And as a businessman, you have to learn how to say no. And that's something I've learned from my father, who was very successful and was very very tough at times, but very shrewd. But also he did have compassion. So I learned from him, and I hope my offspring will learn from me in the same way and continue to go from that.
Interesting. Amazing, David. You know what? I want to ask you one last question just before we wrap all this things up, because I do get a sense that this has been a very important part in your life. How, and if this is too personal, obviously let me know and we can cut it out afterwards, but it's a question that I do feel that I have a sense of responsibility in asking. How important is the perception that you have with your own family, with your father? Do you use that as leverage to become the person that you want to become? Because maybe when I asked the admirational question, it could have just simply, you could have it just straight in your face, right? It could just be your dad, right?
Yeah.
In a sense, that could have been what's been fueling you through all these years, not only genetically, right, because you're his son, but when you're looking at the mirror, right, you're asking yourself that question. Hey, you know what? I just want to be more like my dad in this way or that way or the other. Do you think that's also an important sense of the process, or not really?
Absolutely. My dad, to be in the shadow of my father, was always something that was difficult for me. That's why I did start out working with him. But like I said earlier, I would have never been able to develop as my own person, just being a part of a puzzle and a big organization. My dad has built businesses, lost businesses, gone bankrupt, built a business bankrupt many times, and constantly reinvented himself to where he's at today. And I felt like I've always wanted that, the knowledge, the wisdom, the know-how, but I didn't feel that the old generation was really good at teaching. They were just doing and providing.
They were good executors, yeah.
They were good executors, and my dad came from a world where he started from nothing. It was a necessity to succeed. There was no other option. Not saying that that's not for me, but
it was more different, of course.
It was more, if expenses are higher than revenue, then you're out of business. And I believe that my father was a leader with tough love. And I've always, the fuel for me was to prove him that I am worthy and I can do it, and
in your own way.
In my own way. And I never stopped getting that, but there were glimpses of pride that he had in me that I only was able to understand through other people. And that was that when I hear those things from other people, that gives me the most fulfillment. And I know that every time I see him, he's always asking. For him, business there was nothing else. It was all about that. And when I'm able to report that I'm still standing, and whenever I can tell him good news, it gives me a lot of pride. So that's always been probably the most motivating factor for me to continue to push. And I learned a lot of ethics and discipline from him, because he was always the first and probably the last at his company, no matter how successful it was. And that goes in part to never getting too comfortable, and always being humble, and not getting ahead of yourself. So those pieces are part of my framework.
Amazing. The more you develop yourself into the future, the more you realize that you're still just who you were when you were a child. And aspirations, and philosophy and motivations and strengths, weaknesses.
Yeah.
Amazing. What a great episode, David. Thanks for being on.
Of course. Thank you. And thank you to all your listeners.